Ever wonder what really makes a country rich? Is it gold? Is it brilliant inventions? Well, sometimes it's something way more basic than that. Sometimes it's just about making a promise you can actually keep. Today, we're going to dive into how one very powerful, newly believable promise transformed 17th century England from a financial mess into a global empire. I mean, really think about that question. How does a country go from being totally broke and untrustworthy to a financial giant, and do it in what feels like the blink of an eye? That is exactly what happened in England. And the answer, well, it all comes down to a massive shift in power that completely rewrote the rules of the game back in 1688. All right, so before we get to the big turnaround, we have to understand just how bad the situation was. And in the early 1600s, the problem had a name: the Stuart monarchs. To put it simply, lending money to the King of England, it was a terrible, terrible idea. So here's the basic problem, right? The king was supposed to pay for the entire government, but his regular income just wasn't cutting it. He was always desperate for cash. And when you have absolute power and you're desperate, well, long-term promises tend to get broken. To fill the treasury, the kings got creative in the worst possible ways. They'd demand forced loans, which is basically a tax they pretended they'd pay back someday. They sold illegal monopolies on things like soap, which wrecked entire businesses. They would just flat out seize private property, fire any judge who dared to rule against them, and of course break their promises all the time. So the message from the top was pretty clear: your money is not safe from us. And this wasn't just a feeling people had, okay? We've got the receipts. Just look at that loan from 1617. The crown borrows a huge sum of money, almost £100,000, and promises to pay it back in a year. Instead, they just don't. For 11 years. Yeah, not exactly how you get a 5-star rating on your royal credit score. This quote from the historian Robert Ashton just nails it. The crown had a cavalier treatment of its creditors. Cavalier is the perfect word. It means they were dismissive, they were arrogant, they just didn't care. They acted like paying their debts was completely optional. And when you act like that, guess what? People stop wanting to lend you money. But if you want to know just how bad it got, check this out. Merchants used to store their actual gold and silver in the Tower of London, thinking it was the most secure vault in the entire country. Big mistake. In 1640, the government, desperate for cash, just walked in and seized it all. This one move caused bankruptcies and sent a terrifying message. Literally nowhere was safe from the king's reach. Okay, so something had to give, right? This kind of chaos couldn't last forever. And it didn't. After years of conflict, even a civil war, things finally came to a head in 1688 with what's now called the Glorious Revolution. And this is where our whole story pivots. Now, you've got to understand, this was way more than just swapping out one king for another. This was about ripping up the old rulebook and writing a completely new one. The whole point was to solve this problem of a king with too much arbitrary power once and for all. Just look at the difference here. It is night and day. Before 1688, the king was the law. After, he had to follow the law, just like everyone else. Judges suddenly became independent. The king couldn't just fire them for disagreeing. But the absolute game changer, the most important part for our story, the money. Control over the nation's finances was taken away from the king and handed over to Parliament. So, what did all these new rules actually create? Well, they created something incredibly powerful, a concept that economists call credible commitment. And folks, this is the secret sauce. This is what changed everything. Okay, credible commitment sounds a bit academic, right? But it's actually super simple. It just means you've made a promise that is believable because you are trapped by rules that stop you from breaking it, even if you want to later. It's a promise you have to keep. Think about it like this. You're probably not going to lend $100 to a friend who has a reputation for just deciding not to pay people back, right? They're an untrustworthy borrower. But what if that same friend signs a legally binding contract enforced by a court they have no control over? Suddenly, their promise to pay you back becomes credible. Now you might actually lend them the money. And that is exactly what the Glorious Revolution did to the English government. It turned the king into that credible borrower. Parliament, which was full of the wealthy people who'd be doing the lending, became that powerful neutral enforcer. The king couldn't just change the deal anymore. Parliament wouldn't let him. Okay, we've seen the problem. The crown was a terrible borrower. We've seen the solution. They rewrote the rules. Now for the payoff. And what happened next was nothing short of a financial big bang. So let's set the scene. Right before the revolution, in 1688, the total government debt was about £1 million. And honestly, they struggled to even get that much. Nobody trusted them. You ready for this? Fast forward just 9 years. 9. That number wasn't 2 million, it wasn't 5 million, it was 17 million pounds. Now, this wasn't a crisis. This was a massive, flashing sign of newfound trust. Lenders were suddenly lining up to give the government their money. I mean, just look at that jump. We're talking about a 17-fold increase in borrowing in less than a decade. It's almost unbelievable. The government went from being a financial pariah to the safest investment in town practically overnight. But here's the most amazing part. At the exact same time the government was borrowing way more money, its cost of borrowing was cut in half. Interest rates plummeted from a painful 14% down to around 7%. This is basic economics. When the supply of loans goes way up, but the price goes way down, it means the perceived risk has absolutely collapsed. So, the big takeaway here is this. This financial revolution gave England the firepower, literally, to fight its wars, build a massive navy, and start constructing a global empire. And it all came down to one simple thing: trust, which was now baked into the very rules of the government. But the story doesn't end with the government. Not even close. This newfound stability, this trust in the government's promises, it was contagious. It started a shockwave of confidence that washed over the entire private economy. And then things just started happening, one after another. The Bank of England gets created. Then, boom, private banks start popping up everywhere. The stock market for regular companies, it goes through the roof, growing more than 10 times over. And crucially, because the government was no longer sucking up all the capital at high rates, interest rates for private businesses fell too. It was a chain reaction of prosperity. What you're seeing here is a positive feedback loop. Secure rules lead to trust. Trust leads to investing. For the first time, people felt safe enough to take their savings out from under the mattress and put it to work. All of that newly mobilized money created the financial system that would go on to fund the inventions and factories of the Industrial Revolution, which was waiting just around the corner. Which leaves us with a pretty big question to think about, doesn't it? The story of 17th century England shows us, in vivid detail, that the rules of the political game are the bedrock of economic prosperity. If creating trust through believable promises was the key to unlocking wealth back then, how critical is that same lesson for nations all over the world today trying to build their own stable, prosperous futures? It seems the power of a credible promise, well, that's a lesson that never gets old.